Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give it a couple minutes for people to log in, and then we'll get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join this panel discussion. The topic of today's panel, this afternoon's panel, is human-centric and data-driven, the performance management revolution. Let me first start by introducing myself. My name is Terry Nill. I'm the Vice President for Human Resources at the New York Public Library here in New York City. Approximately 2,800 employees. I have a team of 25 HR professionals, just about every facet of HR, including DEIA, employee labor relations, recruitment, learning and development, volunteers, total rewards, training, the whole kit and caboodle. I want to just start by introducing the panelists. So we have Kurt Olson, and they'll go around and give a little bit more about their background. So Kurt is a VP of Talent and Culture at Unity Point Health. Steve Woolwine is the Vice President of Global Talent and an L&D leader at Genpact. And Dr. Erin Mack is the Chief People Officer at TrueMerica. So I'll start by having Kurt introduce himself a little bit more formally in more detail.
Thanks, Terry. Kurt Olson, everyone, VP of Talent and Culture here at Unity Point. Brief history of Kurt. Before coming here, I was the VP of Talent at Ohio Health in Columbus. Before that, I was at Rush University Medical Center, before that Northwestern, and before that spent 20 plus years with Accenture. So I have my doctorate in OD. I'm definitely an OD guy. I'm a certified executive coach. I'm an Enneagram coach, a conscious leadership coach, and adult chair coach. So talent is what I love. And you'll probably hear from the other folks that we all have a love-hate relationship with performance management. Back to you, Terry.
Steve.
So I'll just start off with, I don't have anywhere near the credentials as Kurt and Erin. So I'm sorry to disappoint everyone who's watching this, but I work for Genpact. Genpact is a global professional services organization, and one of our keys of our business is driving data tech AI, and so that's the business I support from a talent and learning development standpoint. I have roughly around 17 years of HR experience. Worked at Bridgewater Associates, worked at Sears Holdings, so a variety of different industries in my background. Located outside of Chicago, Illinois, so anyone who's in the Midwest, look me up. I'm a very, very, very proud University of Tennessee alumni. I would say I would pause there and not, ramble on about the football team this year. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Terry.
Sure. And last but not least, Dr. Erin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Mack. I'm the Chief People Officer at TrueMerica Multifamily. We're a private equity firm that's national, but our corporate office is here in lovely Beverly Hills, California. As you can see, it's about 80 degrees. Don't be jealous. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Southern California. I teach change management and organizational development. I also have my doctorates in education and organizational development from USC. I've been in the field between organizational development and human resources for over 20 years. I've had my longest stint in the US Army. I was in the military for 8 years. I've had 5 deployments. I also worked at Toys R Us Distribution Center on the East Coast, and also at other small, we'll call them real estate firms. And so happy to be here today. I also have a very special relationship with performance management, and we'll talk about that today.
Perfect, thank you. So let's just kick it off. So performance management, and we are all HR professionals, and so we are deeply involved and well aware of performance management. The fact that every couple of years there's some new ideology around how we manage performance, whether it's a new system, a new concept, and it works for a little while and then it breaks and we're stuck. And I don't think anyone has found the perfect magic bullet for performance management. both from the managers actually doing it and getting them engaged, but also employees seeing the benefit of it and managers seeing the benefit of it. And it's one of these things, one of these, I guess, sore subjects within HR as we think about our careers in terms of how do we get an organization to really embrace a performance management system that's going to work for us, that's going to deliver for us, that's going to really add the value in terms of how we manage performance, how we grow people, develop people, promote them, so on and so forth. And that's really what this discussion is about today, because like I said, there's no perfect system, and we're all scratching our head trying to figure out where do we go? What do we do? What is, I wish, the four of us, or probably 30 plus of us on the call right now, could form an organization and build the perfect performance management system and make gazillions of dollars off of it. But we're not Jeff Bezos, and so Amazon probably already has that cornered. That being said,
Don't count us out yet.
that being said, I wanted to start off with some questions. Just start off with one primary question for the panel. As you think about your careers, as you think about your trajectory, your experience dealing with performance management, and like we all said, we have a love-hate relationship with it. That we can talk a little bit about, and I'll start with you, Aaron. What are some of the best practices you have you developed for establishing a more contextualized, people-oriented approach to performance management, and also what impact have you seen, or challenges even?
I think I have we'll call it like a 4-part process. I think I'm very upfront. I do not manage poor performers. I do believe that performance management is for high performers. I think that termination is for low performers. And so I don't put the pressure on my leadership team to have discussions about people that should not be here. I think that's first and foremost. I think I was able to stress test that the adaptation to that, just that process is when I was in the military. And I realized that as a leader, as a platoon leader, when you had a lot of, whether it's soldiers or just colleagues, when you spend the majority of your time with people who just don't have it, they don't want it, you start, the people who need you, and they're somewhat, we'll call them average, they're not able to get the best of you. And the people who are, I would say, strong performers don't see the value in being a strong performer sometimes. So I do think that you start to kind of tip the scales and where you spend your time. So to avoid that, I'm very strong on taking longer to hire and quicker to fire. Because I think that as you look at effective performance management, I think that the engagement that comes out of it is that you have people who truly want to be here. They're interested in their job. They're receptive to feedback. And that is how you create high performing teams, to where you're only delivering at that point effective feedback, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, for the person who's on the other end of that review. And so that's been my focus. That's been my mantra over the last 20 years. That's
interesting. Performance management is not for poor performance. I like that. Really,
well, we'll
have a whole side conversation about poor performers, and that's another topic for later.
Absolutely.
So Kurt, the same question to you. What practices have you developed, and what impact?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate Aaron's response as well. I guess for me, context is king, because you're seeing different industries represented here, and I happen to be in healthcare. And in healthcare, so coming out of the pandemic, the entire workforce is pretty burnt out. They've seen more death than they imagine they'd ever see in their entire careers, and there's now a tremendous labor shortage for clinicians. So going into COVID, the unemployment rate for nursing was about 1%. Coming out, it's actually a negative unemployment rate, which means there's not enough nurses to go around, which should scare all of us deeply. So I frame that to say context is king. So the nature of our workforce and the nature of what leaders' responsibilities are shifting pretty dramatically. So leaders are now expected to focus on purpose and meaning, not just a paycheck. They're expected to be a leader as a coach, not a boss, not a manager. They're expected to focus on people's lives and how a job fits into the life, not job as the central theme of one's life. It's all about strengths and developing our people and making sure they're resilient in their jobs going forward. So again, all that context begins to paint what role does performance management then have in the context of our broader talent strategy. And for us, and again, this is in healthcare, right? So again, context in healthcare, there's very, unfortunately, healthcare is the one industry that we all need, and it's not capitalistic driven at all, which means our margins are really, really thin. So we have zero ability to raise our rates as costs go up. So as labor costs go up and as equipment costs go up, we can't raise our expenses, our costs to our customers. So what that means is, we don't have a lot of pay for performance opportunity. So it's all about the team, it's all about the meaning, it's all about the purpose. So in that context, performance management has to be just the ongoing conversation with our associates about their development, their career, how we're supporting them, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'll flip it for you. So I spent 20 years at Accenture. Accenture is a beautifully capitalistic company. For those who don't know consulting, pretty lucrative. They make a lot of money, have a lot of excess cash. In that context, performance management is more akin to the strongest survive. And you want to be able to differentiate all your associates, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and be crystal clear about that. Because they're trying to stand out so they can eventually kind of move the food chains and they get a higher bonus and a higher raise and that kind of stuff. So in that context, performance management is completely different. But in healthcare, it's all about our patients, it's all about meaning, it's about purpose and supporting the development of our folks. So when I say context is king, your performance management strategy needs to deeply align with your people strategy and make sure it supports it. Because again, the context of the industry and what you're experiencing in the labor market, et cetera, it kind of drives everything for me. Now, I've lived in all different worlds, right? But in healthcare, performance management is all about the associate development. So hopefully that kind of paints a picture for you, Terry, that and kind of how we approach performance management here.
It's interesting because I'm in a nonprofit mission-focused organization, New York Public Library, serving millions upon millions of New Yorkers every year. And we have performance management, but I think one of the things, and I'm also an adjunct professor as well, teaching human resources and labor relations. And one of the things I've realized in my teaching career over the past 8 years that I've been teaching now is the idea of teaching. This is the whole concept of school, and the same thing goes for performance management. We teach to an exam, a paper, and so students don't get the value, the benefit of the education because they're so focused on I got to get this grade, I got to get my GPA up. And performance management systems are almost the same way, right? And so I need to get this raise, this bonus, whatever it may be. I need to keep my job, great. And so I got to perform to these levers on this performance review. But are you really getting the value of the whole performance management process and system?
Exactly.
Steve, same question for you in terms of what best practices have you developed?
I love what Kirk said. I'm a big believer you have to figure out what you're trying to achieve through performance management process or philosophy. I think it's different from every company, it's different within industries and so forth. And I think sometimes we end up trying to solve for everything, and it ends up being a Super Bowl type of event toward the end of the year. And then our attention goes into how do we execute a very heavy, administrative process versus actually understanding whether or not we're achieving the goals that we signed to achieve. I think, we were joking earlier in the prep call before this, we all have we call it a special relationship. I have a love-hate relationship because I believe in the goals of performance management. I don't know if I've ever seen a company do it very well.
Right.
And so some of the ideas we're playing around with GenPack, and it's early stages. I mean, we're probably no different from most people on this call. We have a once a year process. We look at performance and potential. We use a non-blocker. We use that to inform like incentives and bonuses and stuff like that. And it takes basically all the effort of HR to pull this off. It sucks out the souls of everyone in HR and every employee that goes through it. And one of the things that we're trying to do is think about from a design standpoint, we design these processes often with the organization business in mind, and we don't start first with the employee. And so what is the experience we want the employee to have? What's the outcome we want them to walk away with? And I will tell you, I've been doing this 17 years. I don't know if ever I've talked to an employee who came out of a performance conversation saying, wow, that was amazing.
Right.
And often, I think at best, it meets their expectations and they're told that they're great. And obviously can be very disappointing if it's anything but great. And so when you think about that experience, and that's what people are walking away with in a time where you are trying to help understand how to segment your talent and how to disproportionately invest and reward your talent, that's probably at odds. And so I think one of the things we have to challenge ourselves in this profession is how do we rethink this? And I think one of the principles that we're throwing around is how do we not try to bake in so much into one thing? And so, like, for instance, like I'm a firm believer that if every manager was doing their job right, we don't need performance management. That means that right conversations are happening at the right times and right decisions are action. All performance management is providing a structural process to help try to eliminate the issues where people don't follow a consistent process. And so if you can actually start to think about, how do you get feedback back to the employee in a constructive way? How do you actually focus making sure that people understand what their goals are, how their progression gets their goals? And that's just really embedded just through the day-to-day conversations between managers, peers, colleagues, and so forth. You essentially reduce the reliance on such a process. And I think it opens up more opportunity to take that time and actually think about the talent planning, talent intelligence, ways to actually move a needle, as well as like, how do you think about the career development plans? How do you think about enabling that? And how do you actually equip that employee who's walking out of that performance management conversation saying, wow, I know exactly what I need to do going forward to reach my own goals. And so those are just some of the principles I would lay out. And like I said, Jim Beck is not different. We haven't figured this out. And so that's kind of some of the things that we're thinking about that hopefully would resonate with some people on this call.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Steve. One of the things that we've done in my time at the and I've been VP. I grew up in the organization, so I've been VP for the past 5 years. And so one of the things that started was moving away from the annual performance review process, because that's where the administrative burden and people's just like, okay, it's a check the box type of thing. Let's call it what it is, right? And so we've moved to these quarterly, what we call touch points, mini conversations. And so with that, the employee is actually responsible for kicking that off because the questions go to them first. And it's typically two questions. One is goal oriented. One is more of a stay interview type of question, career growth type of question. But they do it, and then they go to their manager. It goes to their manager with their response. Their manager fills it out, and then they say, okay, I'm ready to go to their manager. We put the onus on the employee. They go to the manager. I'm ready to talk about my performance review for the quarter. The other thing we did was we took away ratings, because that gets into that whole grading system, because people were so focused on the rating, a 4-star or a number 5 or A+, whatever it was, whatever the rating was, and just totally ignored the content of what was actually written. And so moving away from eliminating that rating system, that rating process, has been beneficial for us. Is it working? Time will tell. I think the getting people engaged into the process and really owning it and understanding the value and the benefit of it for both the manager and the employee is one of the biggest challenges. And so one of my goals this year is to get people to do a whole marketing blitz around performance management, because we market so many things at the library for the public, for staff. And so I want to really market the performance management system for our staff. And so the idea, and we haven't done this, but one question I want to ask, and one of the bases for this conversation, is the whole concept of moving away from individualized performance management to more team-based performance management. So I want to be interesting to hear from you all. Have you experienced that? Has your organization begun branching out into this direction? If so, what are some of the takeaways? Or if you're thinking about it, what are some of the takeaways, but also what are some of the pitfalls that you're projecting? And so I'll start with you, Kurt.
Thanks, Terry. In healthcare, it's been a relatively standard practice for a while to get peer feedback. So as you go through the performance management process, you actually can identify folks that you've worked with to give you feedback, then they give you feedback, and then it all rolls up to the one-up, right? And it's proven to be a great way to get feedback from other folks. So part of it is beautiful. But any process comes with challenges and issues, etc., right? Because the individual picks who they get their feedback from. It goes to their manager, and the manager needs to approve it. But if a manager is managing a lot of people, they wouldn't necessarily know kind of who all to go to. So of course there's going to be bias in the selection process of who my peers are, and then bias in the feedback that I get, right? So I've not found a perfect way to do that, but getting peer feedback has proven to be pretty successful. Again, in the context of healthcare, where it's all about development, and most peers take it seriously. Some game the system. I'll be frank. I mean, it happens. But again, that's all in the context of it's all about developing our folks. It's not linked to a bonus structure, and it's not linked to their merit structure either. So it purely is development. Now, I'll give you another example. I have a colleague who's not in healthcare. He's outside of healthcare. He's actually a sales guy. And a year ago, they switched his performance management process to be a team-based bonus structure. And so he has his individual goals and the team has their goals. His bonus is based on the team goals, and he has very little influence over the other team members and kind of how they're doing. And he recently told me the team-based goals that are not going to achieve. So he may not get his bonus because of the team-based goals were not met. He met his individual, in fact, he greatly exceeded his individual goals. He is now thinking about leaving that organization because of that. So I kind of paint both sides of the equation, right? If performance management is about development and it's not driving your compensation structure, it can be a pretty useful mechanism. And it's proven to be that way in healthcare. If it's primarily to drive comp and your compensation and bonus, I think the risk goes up tremendously that bad things can happen because of that structure, right? Now you see, again, context is king.
Yes.
Right. So to me, in healthcare, it works because it's called magnets and magnet structure. Hospitals get rated by this external group, and part of the process is peer feedback. So it works pretty well in healthcare. I've not seen it work super well outside of healthcare. So back to you, Terry. Just some thoughts.
Thank you. Steve, same question to you.
So I would, again, Kurt, you and I must be thinking alike, which is probably dangerous. I think it's where you put the mechanism in place around we focus on teams. Like, I think one of the areas at Genpact we're starting to look at is putting a mechanism on what is the overall skill set of a team. And so how do we actually evaluate that and whether or not that's working versus like how the people are doing. We obviously have a similar structure where people get feedback from one another and we can kind of evaluate how a team is working holistically. But it's more important for us is, does the team actually have a combination of skills that actually will meet some of our clients' demands and some of the requirements that we have on that particular deal or project? And so do we have people who all, is it a heavy tech, deal, but we don't have anyone that can actually speak to the client, for instance? And even looking at some of the personality profiles and so forth like that. And so we're at the early stages of trying to understand the skill sets of our employees, because I think that right now a lot of the self-assessed and even like some evaluation tools that we have out there fall short. Trying to crowdsource that a little bit and understanding what the skills of each individual on the team, what does that mean for the overall team, and where do we have gaps on the team, as well as eventually get to a point where we can understand what is the combination of people that work well together that generate results. I don't think we're at a point where we're going to think about shifting rating from individuals to teams. I think that if we do that, it'd probably be in a more piloted approach, but we haven't had that conversation yet.
Thank you. And Aaron?
Yes, I think that when I think about this question, I think that it really just depends. I think that you've heard that echoed throughout the Zoom so far. I think if you're looking at special projects that are probably tactical and they take a holistic approach to what success is and you're okay with that, then that could be something that's considered what we would look at as a spot bonus or outsized. But when it really comes to the metrics associated with individualized performance, people are very funny about sharing compensation, sharing awards, sharing recognition. And so you get in this space to where if you know that you performed outsized, you deserve something, and you know that someone next to you is not pulling their weight effectively, and you're getting the same thing, you're going to cause a lot of collisions with people who are outstanding performers. You're going to see that you don't really have outstanding performers. And so I think that some of the things that we have to consider is structure. Does it make sense for the organization? Are these structured best for special considerations or special projects? I do push the group to think about also intersects such as your generation. I will tell you that, you know, within my generation, we don't like working on group projects. We like all of the everything to ourselves, right? But as we start to see our children growing up, I do start to see, even as a professor, that people are really wanting to work as a group. They really appreciate that level of collaboration, and those values are more important to them, depending on compensation, because I don't know what real responsibilities they've had yet, but they're pushing this concept. So we may have to think about what works well now, and then in the back of our minds, start thinking about what we need to think about as we continue to manipulate what works, what structures are effective based on the new generations that are coming into the workforce.
So I have a question for you, Erin, and I'll go back around to everybody else.
Okay.
Because I think about the topic of this, the title of this particular discussion, and it's human-centric and data-driven. And so we do the performance management system, whether we do it quarterly, annually, biannually, whatever it may be. What are you doing with that when you've gotten through the full process, everybody has done their due diligence? What are you doing with that? What sort of data are you deriving from the performance management process for that year, and how are you utilizing that data?
So it depends. So remember, I talked about, I know that people probably laugh that we're only managing high performers, and that's because we have the luxury to do that. So I see Kurt and Steve wiggling their chair. But here's the thing. The goal for us is okay, so within the structure, you know, we're looking at performance quarterly, and because we have to, because in our industry in real estate, whether you're looking at cap rates, you're looking at anything that changes our market, we have to look at it and be laser focused. So we're looking at data, numbers, performance quarterly, because what you decide in Q1 may not be your strategy in Q2 and Q3. We can just look at 2019. Look at how in December of 2019, as leaders, we were thinking about what 2020 was going to look like. I bet we were all wrong. And so that is why the quarterly approach is more effective. So when we get this data, we're looking at two things. What happened in this year? How were we how was this individual best able to pivot within the year? And then three, we look at feed forward. So based on the information that we're getting, we're looking at how do we develop you next quarter? What information, what technology, what resources, what human capital are you going to need to continue to do your best work, be able to pivot when you need to, and be able to be resourced against the cascade of goals that you're receiving for your team, for your department, and for the organization. So that's how we're really looking at these KPIs, because we may look at KPIs and say, okay, we understand these are the KPIs. This is your base. This is the base of what it is that you do. But again, depending on the market, depending on the things that they're constraining our time and our efforts, there's a lot of time where we look for people to do something a little bit more fluid. How can you move around your day-to-day and be effective if some of this information of what you believe is your day-to-day has to change, has to evolve? And so that's when we're looking at the metrics we're looking at, or the type of people, the behavioral attributes. We're just looking at, can you execute?
Thank you. Steve, what sort of data are you deriving from your performance management process?
Yes, I mean, for executive population, especially, we have, these standard scorecards filled with some of the, quantifiable, metrics you would expect. And obviously we track that. And, but what we've seen is it's had, there's pros and cons with it, obviously. Like, look, at the end of the day, when you start measuring some of these metrics, like they often are not 100% attributable to that person. And sometimes it's not even 100% attributable to the team because there's environmental factors that happen and stuff like that that you just absolutely cannot control. And so you have to balance that with, kind of, again, the experience you want the employee to have and, their, propensity to stay and be retained by the organization and do their best work. One of the things that we're looking at in concept of like, how do we actually think about looking at performance differently? I think it's going to be a combination of what I call the swing and shot. And I'm using that analogy from my Bridgewater days where, and I'm not sure how many people who play golf on this call, but before I had twins, I used to play golf a lot. And you could have a terrible swing and hit a great shot. You will get lucky every once in a while. But the key to actually being a good, golf, I don't say golfer, golf player, is that you have a consistent swing. Now, that's the hardest thing to measure, though. But with some of the advancements in like different algorithms and so forth, there are ways to understand what are the predictive indicators of that swing. And if you have confidence, the swing will produce the shot, so you can actually measure performance in two ways. And so one of the ways we start playing around with is the organization network analysis, where basically Microsoft has a tool where it looks at your Teams chats, it looks at your Outlook emails, and it looks particularly at who are you engaging with and the frequency. And then it looks at those people and how they're engaging. Because what they found, and our analysis actually backed this up, is the strength of the collaboration and the network is actually the number one predictor of performance, number one predictor of retention. And the interesting fact is, if you start to overlay other variables to try to create a better regression model, every single data point we've tried to add has actually weakened the model in that. And so it starts to think about, okay, what really matters at work? And so as you think about rewards and incentives, you always have to tie that to outcomes. But if you think about performance and talent management, it's like, how do you actually use the predictive indicators to get a view on someone's swing? And then it's your job as an organization to put them in the best place for them to produce value for your organization.
Thank you. Definitely some interesting insights. Kurt?
Yeah, a couple of things. Great responses so far from the team as well. The only thing I'd add is that in healthcare, it's one additional data point for our balanced scorecard. So we look at quality, we look at safety, we look at culture, of course, we look at finances. And this is kind of one additional data point for teams to look at how good is our culture on the team, and for leaders, how good of leaders are they, and balancing those scorecard dimensions as well. So we don't let it drive kind of individual discussions. It's more kind of team-based and leader-based discussions based upon the data that's coming back, and it kind of feeds into our broader balanced scorecard as well.
Thank you. So I want to shift gears for a bit because depending on who you ask, some will say we're still in the pandemic or out of the pandemic, who knows? But there have been a lot of lessons learned. And so this whole concept, and it's a new concept for many. It's definitely has taken over the world, but this whole concept of hybrid work, right? And so the idea of being in the office, but in the seat 5 days a week is for most industries, for most organizations, is a thing of the past. And I feel like we're all waiting for some Uber work god to tell us this is what it's going to be going forward. And so we're just left saying, okay, we'll continue to kick this can down the road until somebody tells us stop. But when we start thinking about hybrid work and on-site versus remote work versus hybrid work and performance management, there's a whole, and this is definitely a whole nother conversation about management of teams that are hybrid remote, and so where they never once was. And so managers need to evolve as well, right, on that front. But then a core part of that is performance management. And how do you manage that performance? Are you evaluating them the same? Are you, treating everybody the same, taking aside equity and equality and things like that? But what has been your experience, and how do you strike that balance of managing one's performance or running your performance management system when the way we work has changed. And so I'll start that off with you, Steve.
So I'm probably the wrong person to start off with because, look, our workforce is, I'll just say it's a white collar workforce. Even the folks that are delivering some of the operations for our key clients, they're behind a computer. It's basically all digitized. So there's not a true impact on the physicality of the work. And so our performance management philosophy process, everything has not changed. It's the same thing. You set the accurate goals, you figure out how to quantify and measure those goals, you give feedback into those goals, and you highlight the gaps and try to figure out how to close the gaps. And you continue that conversation through the entire year, when at the end of the year, you kind of basically formalize all that. I think the one area that I think has been interesting is we do have some areas that have small offices. So for instance, we have an office in New York City. Not a huge office, but like a lot of our senior executive teams sit there. And so what we've seen is some people who are in that area make it a point to go into the office because it's easier to create advocacy, it's easier to collaborate, get buy-in. And we do see a little bit of a correlation to people who are given more opportunities, who are actually exceeding. Sorry, that's my dog. She loves performance management, apparently. But we see a correlation there. And we've also gotten feedback. I had somebody who literally sits in North Carolina and was felt like they were actually, facing an uphill battle versus someone who sat in the tri-state area because of that.
Because they have more face time with the executive.
Yeah, it was just because you think about it this way, if you're remote, it's not just catching someone at the coffee maker, it's not in the elevator going down. You have to be more purposeful. That takes more, vision, it takes more effort. And then even when you have a conversation, it always becomes more formal versus, hey, let's go run down to Starbucks and get a tea or coffee. And so we see kind of almost the inverse of it, where people feel like, hey, I'm not getting the same opportunities potentially as people in the office. Again, we're still early, we're still kind of figuring out what that looks like, because again, we don't have a huge population in the office, and we don't want to overreact to that anecdotal feedback. But I thought that would be an interesting nugget to share with everybody.
Okay, thank you. Erin, you have that set up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually my sentiments echo very closely to Steve, which makes me feel a little bit better, because I don't want to be crazy. But I will tell you that, for True America, for example, the majority of our colleagues, we would say, are hybrid anyway, and they were before, just because of the nature of their position. They're always at the properties, they're always meeting with our partners, and so they're in and out of the properties. I think that, when you look at roles that, let's say from our accountants, for example, they experience some level of isolation. And I think that accountants that were coming in versus ones that decided they were not going to come in, I think that it was less about whether or not performance management, the metrics needed to be reevaluated versus the leadership reevaluating their response to people not coming in or choosing to come in. And so this is where I say, hey, sometimes we need to check on learning. I know for me personally, I was starting to favor people that I saw every day, even though I was seeing them, because their work quality wasn't there. And so we have to ask ourselves, okay, right? Where are you really favoring that aggressive mid versus the high performer at home who is at their computer at 6 a.m. and signing off at midnight just to show you that they're producing versus the person that's working those bank hours? And so I think that, coming from real estate, which, very old type of group here, they're very much like, I need to see the white in your eyes when I pass by your cubicle to know you're there. They're at the elevator trying to see what time you're coming to work. You better not be making oatmeal at 9 a.m. You better be sitting in your chair with a gym bag next to your desk ready to work all day. And so that, I think, is a mentality perspective versus the perspective of what from a metrics thing needs to change. I think we as leadership need to focus on how do we what do we believe is effective when managing virtual teams? How are we fair? How are we not being discriminatory? And I think that and I think Steve said it best, is it's how are you precise? Because it is easier to walk out of your office and say, hey, you, or, I was just, these are a stream of thoughts, or, you're on my way for me to do something else. And how do you establish, other people not having FOMO who aren't coming into the office or interfacing with you because they're not able to collide with you naturally? And I think that in order to, stop that from happening, us as leaders need to make sure that when we're spending time with people, there's precision there, and that we're bringing people together, not because it's scheduled to just happen, but because we have something to say and we want them to walk away with something that's tangible. So I think that that's my perspective versus changing the actual metrics. It's changing your personal obstacles that you may have in really evaluating performance because someone's either present or you don't actually see them.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Kurt.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I think most of the major points have been mentioned. I guess for healthcare, when you're running a hospital, people have to be there. So that's different than some of the other contexts, right? So our workforce, some of them absolutely have to be certain physical locations, taking care of patients. In clinics, clinics can be much more virtual. You can do telehealth and those kind of things. And then the corporate side can be anywhere, right? So we truly have a pretty diverse workforce that some have to be physically there, some do not, never have to be there physically there. So there is a lot of variation, but the points have already been made around, you have to be clear in your measures. So you measure the accountabilities, you're not policing hours in the office and that kind of stuff. And communication becomes a key mechanism. I guess the thing I'll highlight that is implicit in the discussion so far, that this kind of stuff is the great enabler, right? If you enable technology appropriately, you can mimic some of the kind of running into people in the hall. So if you got to talk to someone, text them, get them online, go, get them online, talk to them. But people have to have that flexibility to do that. So, an easy thing to do is, do huddles at the beginning of each day, check in with the teams, see how they're doing, quick huddles, boom, 15 minutes, boom, you're out, you're done. And then, some people like to create office hours. So like from 1 to 2, I'm not going to schedule anything. If you need me, just ping me, yada, 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 right? So the technology tools we have are enabling us to work in this remote hybrid world. And if you manage that well, it can be relatively effective. Now, it's not as easy as physically running into someone here, right? Because I happen to be in the office today. But you can totally mimic that. And it is amazing. Some people on the team have actually never physically met. I meet them through this mechanism, right? But, a lot of team members you actually never actually, and I was with Accenture, that was true all the time. It's a global team. But even here at Unity Point, I'm interacting with some folks who I've never physically met because they happen to be in Sioux City or wherever they happen to be, right? They're not actually here in my little town here. So technology is the key enabler, but again, it gets down to leadership philosophy. It's about output and those kind of things. It's not about policing and that kind of stuff. We talked enough about that already, but it can work, but it takes a lot of conscious thought.
Thank you. So we understand how performance management systems work for the most part, right? And we understand the traditional purpose of performance management systems, but we know employees are, particularly, we can talk generational till the cows come home, right? And what the different generations, the newer generations, I dare to say younger generations, so the newer generation, what they're looking for when it comes to performance management, quite frankly, what they're looking for from their employer. Forget about performance management for a minute. And so as we think about, we know folks want to grow, like people want positive feedback. And like you said at some point, Steve, like everything is great until you're told, you should be doing this better. And then the conversation takes a turn for the worse, right? But I want to hear that I'm doing great. That's all I want to hear. And then I think that I'm good. But another component of it is, it's fine that I'm here, I'm doing great, but I also want to talk about my career growth. I want to talk about what's next. Where do I go? What does my ladder look like? What does my lattice look like? Maybe in some instances. And so I'm interested to find out from the three of you, how are you using your performance management system to meet that need and that demand of the employees? And so I'll start with you, Erin.
Sure. Ours it's tough. I think that a lot of people are focused so much on retention. And I think that if you have people in their roles for a long time, that doesn't mean that you have the best people in that position. And so I do try to take a step back, and it goes back to what Kurt's language is, the context, right? So I'm very upfront with people that, if we're looking at performance management, looking at certain jobs, sometimes a job is just a job until there is an opportunity to consider something else, because it has to meet the business plan, and just does the business require this? And so the reality of it is that I'm very upfront with people and say, listen, you're here to perform a job, and you should do well in your job. And if you feel like, you see opportunities to do other things, remain fluid and flexible in your job, and reach out and try to touch other areas that, enable us to see what other skill sets we can leverage from you. What are your additional strengths, and how does that impact the organization? Now, on the other hand of that, I'm okay with people leaving every 3 years or 4 years in certain positions, because what I have seen is that sometimes you level up that certain role. And so sometimes it's okay to accept departure when you've bought up with the incoming person. And I think we have to wrap our head around that. It's okay to see new people coming in, because an organization is a living, breathing organism. It's not stale. Only the name has stayed the same, but the people change, and we have to accept that. It's not that we're not doing a great job as great leaders. If someone comes back to you and says, I've got a way bigger job, and I appreciate everything you've done for me, and all the performance management metrics that you made me believe that I was great, and I've taken this and I've gone to do great things, you should be happy. That is natural progression. So that's how we use performance management. We look at how we evaluate your job and how we evaluate the attributes that you have to see if you are adaptable for something else, if and when that occurs. But we don't make any false promises.
So I agree there, and I'm going to pass it to Kurt and Steve as well, but I just want to make one other point with all of that, because a lot of performance management systems, they look in the rear view,
Correct.
right? And they don't look out the front window. And that's one of the flaws in performance management. And whether it's the technology, whether it's the people that are running the system, whether it's the ideology of that particular company, that's one of the major issues. I won't say the only issue, one of the major issues with performance. I look in the past, and we never talk about going forward or what I need to go forward. And so, Kurt, I'll pass the question on to you.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. You'd actually mentioned something earlier that I'm going to kind of pull the string on that. So you mentioned you went to kind of quarterly check-ins, I think, and I might get that number wrong.
Yep.
I think it's quarterly. So we have the annual process, so the annual performance management, process and check-in and all that. Off cycle, we do 2 career check-ins though. So we don't we talk about IDPs in the context of performance management. Then off cycle, we do check-ins for the IDP and the career.
Gotcha.
So we try to take kind of formal time for the leaders to check in, separate from the whole performance management process, which is backward facing in most situations, right? Because it's feedback, how would you do over the past year? But then we flip it to say, if in these check-ins, it's much more forward facing. And are they getting the support they need? Again, kind of relinking back to their purpose and their meaning, stepping in that leader as coach, supporting their development, et cetera. So we try to create space, and the managers and leaders have to do that. But we try to actually create check-ins in the performance management process where the leader, we don't create a lot of paperwork around that. It's literally a checkbox. Did you do it or not? Bada bing, bada boom, you're done. We didn't want to create a bunch of forms and that kind of junk. That's part of the challenge with performance management. But we wanted to kind of build it into the process so the leader has to recognize they're actually doing it. So we try to create kind of steps in the process to allow that space for leaders to have that more productive career-based discussion with folks.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
I'll keep it brief because I think we have limited time, but there's a statistics out there that basically says like 60% of jobs that exist today did not exist 5 years ago. And it goes back to you're looking through the front windshield view, Terry. Like one of the things we're doing at Genpack is we're trying to shift to a skills first approach. And so as you think about like the concept of career conversations, it's more about how are you remaining relevant with the skills that you're trying to build or hone or stay fresh on, and then what are the new skills that you're trying to learn? Because I know all of us have been through this exercise where you start visualizing your own career and you go, hey, this is what I think my next 2 or 3 steps will be. And how often has that not been farthest thing from the truth? And so I think if you shift your focus on more, what are the skills? What's the clustering of skills? What power skills do you need? And trying to see around the corner and what other like hard skills, tech skills you may want to adopt. That's the best way to kind of shift that conversation with the employee to specifically be more forward facing and more about enablement and developing them versus just probably talking about this is the job I think you can do in 1 year.
Gotcha. Thank you. Final question is around accountability, inclusivity, equity, accountability. I want to really focus on accountability. And so we have large organizations, right? And we do this performance management system. All these reviews come in, and so the quality of the review, unless there's some technology, AI that can run through each review and say this one was written perfectly, this one is half-assed, whatever it may be. So how do we hold managers accountable for actually taking the process seriously, bringing value to the process, and also the employee if there's a self-review component? And so how do we hold them accountable? And so I'll start that with you, Steve.
The hardest question.
It is a hard one because I don't think anyone's figured it out.
Yeah,
really.
I want to resist the urge of talk about some of the traditional things that HR has done in the past, like manager training and all that stuff. But look, I mean, if you go back from a technology perspective, we just spent an hour on generative AI, right? And so there's going to be tools out there that will allow you to understand kind of what is the quality of the manager's review, what's the quality of the self-appraisal, how big of a disconnect is there between the two, what are their inputs and managers considering and so forth. So I mean, at Genpact, what we do is like we basically say, hey, managers, your responsibility to get as many perspectives as you can, because if you're just relying on your own, you're going to get it wrong. And we do have tools and other processes that help to kind of facilitate that. And we do say the same thing about to the employee around their self-appraisal. But I think all of this is going to quickly change with the advent and generative AI and so forth, which will probably create other complications, but I think will help get to a way where you can assess the quality of these things in a much more efficient and reasonable turnaround time type of way.
Kurt?
Yeah, I know we're getting pressed for time. I think Steve did a great job. A couple of things that I'll mention that have proven to be perhaps a bit in their face, but effective. We actually do calibration meetings where we get the leaders in the room, then we compare the ratings. And some people are easy graders, some people are hard graders. It tends to get rid of that. The other thing that we do is in the calibration process, we put a DE&I lens into the ratings. And let's be frank, everyone's got bias. And the key is, can we kind of flush out what the bias looks like and be more consistent with it, right? So having a DE&I lens into the discussion also tends to put more kind of, I think, teeth into the accountabilities to do this stuff well, because how someone grades their team is going to be shown to everyone else as well. So that calibration meeting, although a bit kind of over the top maybe, does prove to be pretty effective in terms of making people accountable for doing it well.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Aaron.
I have, it's almost like methodical. Like Kurt, have a kickoff meeting with my leaders and people who are writing other people's reviews. And what I let them know is that if something has been resolved, it does not belong in the review. And so to ensure that that happens, no, seriously, because that's old news. I make sure that my team, believe it or not, we scan all reviews so that we don't see backsides and elbows at the end of the year, because it's not effective, right? So it's not effective feed forward talking about what happened in first quarter, unless you're talking about something that is important or something you're wanting someone to learn from, and it's a continuous issue. And so I think that what we do is we take what you want to say, and I spoke about this in the last chat that we had about AI, and we drop the core competencies in, we take what you want to say, and we ask ChatGPT to, like merge these things together so you get an effective output response that is directly related to the core competencies versus a whole bunch of gibberish about how you feel that's laced with bad tone that's not going to pass the smell test or the DEI test. And so you can use these metrics to really merge even your personal understanding of how to be a better writer and how to make sure that your writing is more quantitative and qualitative based on what the trajectory of where you like to see this person go. So I was quick. Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate this. This is fantastic, and hopefully the participants really got some value out of this conversation. I definitely did. Learn some new things. Got to go back and do some homework. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks, Terry.
You're welcome. Enjoy your day.